4, 3. Hi, welcome to Full Scottish number 9. We've got a really packed programme for you today, so without further ado, we'll go on with it. We're going to explain to you what we've got coming up. We've got newspaper reviews today, and with us to do so is Glasgow SNP Councillor Mary Hunter, Edinburgh Napier journalism lecturer Claire Trodden. We've got Pauline McNeill, Labour MSP, and David Pratt, contributing foreign editor to the Sunday Herald.
Pauline McNeill's also going to be talking to us today about her trip to the Lebanon this week. She was there with Caring Scotland, helping deliver food parcels in Beirut and the Bekaa Valley. And we've got comedy and music for you as well. We've got comedy from Ross McClelland and music from harpist and fiddler Emma Durkin.
Yeah, so it's a very busy show. How was your week, Misha?
I had a good week.
Yeah?
Well, not a great week. I think. Okay. I suspect from what you said earlier, you had a better week than
I had a good week. I did, yeah. I had a very good week, very busy. Went to see Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, which was fantastic. All the Beach Boys hits. He did Pet Sounds in the second half, which was tremendous. And what? Brian Wilson? You don't know Brian Wilson? Oh, come on.
My daughter knows more about the Beach Boys than I do.
Right, okay.
I'm not a fan.
Okay, fair enough. Also did a bit of writing, wrote a thing about the Yes Movement for the National on Monday. Also wrote a thing about protest music in the Sunday Herald, which is in the papers today. Still available in shops. Not suggesting you go out and buy it, but yeah, really good idea. Protest music, protest songs, your favourite?
I had to think really hard about that, but I've been listening to an 80s playlist on Spotify this week and singing along quite loudly to the Specials and Ghost Town.
Yeah, it's in there.
Good one. It's in your
Ghost
list,
Town is in my list, yeah.
What's your favourite?
I've got 16. It kind of varies. I'm going to be like modern rather than do all that old Bob Dylan rubbish. Not rubbish. Rubbish is the wrong word, sorry. Not Bob Dylan, I didn't mean that. I did not mean you were rubbish. I'm going to go with Beyonce, but I'll talk about that later on because I'm boring everybody.
I've talked about it all morning.
I know, but there you go. So anyway, let's move on and do the paper review. Front pages.
Front pages?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got today's Sunday Herald. Offshore firms buying into Scottish football clubs.
Indeed. The Sunday Times, which is one of the big stories of the day. Boris and Gove. I'm going to try and see how I can hold this and read it at the same time. Boris and Gove last Cameron on immigration.
Telegraph today, Cameron too rich to care about migration.
Yeah, so clearly
Priti Patel.
The European thing is getting so ridiculous that it's probably going to see the entire Labour Tory government meltdown. Sunday Mail, Crown Chief duped by sleep lie rapist. Yeah, it's easy for you to say.
And today's Observer, a massive boost for Cameron as more than 600 economists are rejecting Brexit.
Okay, so we're going to look at Europe first because, as I said, it's probably the biggest story of the day. The European referendum campaign is really, I mean, it was nasty before, but now it's getting just incredibly difficult, I think, to see how the Tory government can pull itself back together after the referendum. Mary, what are you thinking about that?
Well, I think it's nice of the Tory party to invite us all to join in this civil war that's engulfing them, because that's pretty much the way the EU referendum campaign has gone up until now. I mean, I think you're right. If it's going to turn on immigration, it's just going to be nasty. I'm certainly not looking forward to it. I think there's an onus on all of the rest of us who actually do want to have a more kind of positive campaign about the European issues to try and focus on those issues and as far as possible minimise the kind of really quite unpleasant stuff about immigration, which I suspect we're going to be getting over the next few weeks.
We've been talking for weeks now, and this programme as well, about the positive case for it. And Claire, are you seeing anything or any attempts so far to make that case?
Well, the only thing I can hope is that it doesn't turn people off completely and they just think it's a private fight between politicians that's removed from them. That the level of it will actually galvanise people to vote, to actually get out there and take part and try and wrench it back from these idiots who are using it as a very, very personal fighting ground.
Yeah.
I think it would be tragic. Obviously, it's one of the bit. If we keep having these massive votes, the biggest vote in your lifetime.
Yeah.
This is one of the biggest votes in our lifetime, and it's important that I think that people get past the politicians. I mean, and I don't mean anyone that's around this table, but these particular politicians, and actually see the issues.
It was interesting that they've used the phrase "once in a generation" vote. You would have thought they might have learned. So if there was any words you wanted to avoid, they would be them. Pauline, what do you think about, I guess, do you think David Cameron and Boris Johnson will ever speak to each other again, or will ever be able to work together again?
No. I think it appears to be very deep-seated, and I think, and because it's been so public, it's hard to see. And I think many people who respected Boris previously, I think he's lost quite a lot of respect that he previously had, because he's had such public fights and he's seen as someone who is more interested in the big job than he is on arguing the grounds for leaving the European Union.
United Nations is later. That's the next one.
I just say I can see them working together if the price was right. Frankly, they have no scruples. I can see them working together again.
So young, so cynical. David.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting in the papers today generally in terms of how almost the ground shifted a little bit as well, I think, towards Cameron's future, the Tory party's future. You know, it's not just about a spat now. They're already looking beyond the whole kind of referendum campaign. I mean, even if Cameron comes out, even if there is a vote, I think, to actually stay in Europe, you know, depends on the margin of that vote, of course. But I think Cameron's, you know, his cards are numbered here. And certainly if it goes against him, then, I mean, he's toast, basically, isn't he? I mean, the Tory party are going to rip him apart.
There was a piece in one of the papers today, I'm not sure which one, saying that there's a likelihood of a coup no matter what happens.
I think the ground set for it's such a poisonous atmosphere amongst them at the moment that it's only a matter of time before this happens, you know.
Yeah.
The immigration thing, which is a huge thing in England, isn't really here, is it? No?
Not to the same extent, because I think we don't have quite the same level of immigration, basically. I mean, I think in London and the southeast, it's a much bigger issue. But I think, I mean, one of the interesting stories there was Priti Patel saying that Cameron and so on are immured from the effects of immigration. And I think that's true. I think that is true, because immigration tends to be in more working class areas, and because there's been so little investment in housing and improving public services in those areas in the southeast in particular, that's kind of driving the anti-immigration rhetoric. So I think there's been a failure by government historically, particularly in London and the southeast, to actually ensure that you had the housing and the services to accommodate the number of people who are coming in to live there. And there's been a failure, I think she's right to say there's been a failure by that kind of quite elite level of politicians to actually understand the impact of overcrowding, the impact of not being able to afford a house, the kind of worries people have, people who maybe live very precarious lives, they're on 0 hours contracts or whatever, they're just living month to month, and the fear they have that immigration is going to undercut their position even further. I think people like Nigel Farage understand that and they exploit it. I think people like Cameron don't really understand that, because they just see it as being a kind of economic benefit, but they don't understand the human side of it.
I mean, it's kind of assumed that Scotland's going to vote to stay in. What do you think, Claire? Are you sort of thinking that that's generally what people are going to... Is that generally the view of people you know, that, yeah, Scotland's relatively more comfortable with Europe than
Well,
maybe
I was
parts of
surprised to
England?
find that some people aren't. I thought it would be, yes, people will vote to stay in, because obviously Scotland is quite different from what's going on in the south of England and the fights that are going there. I think it will, perhaps not as resoundingly as is believed, but I hope so, certainly hope so.
We've looked a lot at the Remain people and I guess the Tory Civil War. Let me put the case against what's been happening with the Leave people. Let me look at the Remain case and say that that's not been put particularly strongly, perhaps because of the lessons of the independence referendum in Scotland, because there was a backlash against people sharing a platform with each other, so that hasn't happened with Europe. As a result, maybe we're not... Who is making the case? Pauline, I'm looking for somebody to say, right, here's the great things about Europe, and I'm still waiting.
Yeah, I think that's true. And during the Scottish election campaign, certainly Labour were asking voters also how they were voting in the election, but also how they were voting in the EU referendum. And I was quite concerned by the results, because I would say, although we wouldn't ask every voter, I would say it felt to me like almost 8 out of 10 were saying, not really sure whether I want to remain. So someone has to start making the case, as you say, on the ground to people. What would be the reasons that people would think would be positive?
I think what's interesting is that all the facts and figures that are being shared are UK facts and
Yeah.
figures. What we
They're
don't
not
actually
Scottish.
have is a very, very clear Scottish perspective, how it actually impacts Scotland one way or another. And I think somebody needs to take responsibility for breaking
worrying,
that down.
I think it's worrying too, and it is that the papers reflect that today. This focus on immigration. I mean, clearly, Boris and Govan, they've spotted this potential Achilles heel here, and that's the issue that it could just tip it for them. So they're focusing on that, but there's so many other issues around here. I mean, the Observer's front page today, about something like 600 economists, senior economists, who've actually said it's a bad idea to leave Europe. And I don't know, I mean, even going back to the Scottish referendum, is the economy quite often that is the motivating factor in terms of how people vote, So I think that's a significant thing in the paper today. I'm not suggesting that ordinary people will pay much attention to what economists say, but if they want some kind of reassurance that it's better to stay in, and make the case for remaining, then that's worth listening to.
What confuses me a little bit, and without making it too party political, but when SNP politicians, particularly Alex Salmond, during the EU debate this week, when he said that would lead to another independence referendum in Scotland, then he was accused quite strongly by Willie McCrae, by one, of undermining the whole case. And yet David Cameron says it all the time, that a vote to leave Europe would lead to a vote on the future of the UK.
Alex Salmond was asked that question, so he had to give.
Give
an answer. I mean, one of the issues here. I mean, I agree that that there hasn't been a great deal of momentum in this campaign. That is because of the decision to hold it a month after the Scottish Parliament campaign. Like Pauline, SNP folk were asking people about the referendum as you were canvassing for the Scottish Parliament elections, but realistically, you can't run two campaigns at the same time. You just can't do that. So, that means that the next 4 weeks have got to count much more, perhaps, than, we really consider beforehand.
Is
the
that
next 4
enough
weeks, we
time?
just need to get out
Really,
there.
to get
It's
that
not a lot of
message
time,
out.
is it?
No.
Pauline?
I think it's probably enough time, but I think there needs to be a real focus on what affects people in their daily lives. And I think that there's been, you reap what you sow, and in some ways I think we're paying the price for many years of dissatisfaction in Europe. I mean, I thought long and hard about my position on Europe, because I think there needs to be deep-seated reform, and one of the reforms being, I think, crying out is how remote Europe is from ordinary citizens. Whether there is enough time to show people that it does actually matter to their daily lives. But if we want to win it, that's where we need to be.
Because it's a hard case, isn't it, for independence, for instance, in Scotland, whether you liked it or whether you wanted it or whether you didn't want it, you felt passionate about it. But it's quite hard to be passionate about a message which says, Europe's not that great really, but it's better to be in it than to be out it. That's not going to have you running to the barricades going,
I think a lot of the young, well, certainly students that I teach, tend to think of themselves as they're international and they're UK, but they tend to think Europe, they don't have the same closed borders mindset as we do. It could be social media, it could be because they can all travel thanks to all these fantastically floating cheap flights. But they have a different viewpoint. They don't see the same borders and boundaries as we do, and they probably haven't heard of all the stories in the media, which we must take some blame for.
Absolutely
about this, the angle of the banana, all this misinformation that was put out.
take the blame for nothing.
And Boris.
It's about getting those young folk out to vote.
I'm glad to you mentioned social media, because it segues into.
It does. It segues into this week's story about reclaiming the internet. Yvette Cooper is behind a motion, I think, in Parliament on Thursday this week to try and address the horrible, evil online trolling that goes on, particularly of women. Today's Sunday Mail has got a piece with Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh, Hannah Bardell and Jo Swinson talking about some really, really awful stuff that has been said about them, not just online but posted to them, emailed to them. It really is quite disturbing. How do you take that on and win? That's
Well, the problem is, I mean, it's a legislative area that's really problematic, I think. Although, reading that piece, it's not just about internet, or social media trolling. I mean, in the case of Tasmania Ahmed, I mean, she was getting letters through snail mail, actually through the post. This is someone that's taken considerable amount of time to do that. But it's difficult to see how. I remember talking to a senior lawyer about this, and he was saying what a legal minefield the whole social media thing will prove to be. This was years ago, and it's certainly proven to be the case at the moment. It's great that they're highlighting it, but I'm not quite sure how they're going to push it forward. And there's also issues of there's free speech issues concerned. Although quite clearly, if you look at the rag rips that Sunday Mail has used today, showing actual quotes and stuff, it's beyond just comment. I mean, this is absolute bile, and really, really horrendous
I think
stuff.
by just saying that's what we all have to individually say this is not right, and actually stand up and say that, because it's important that the language that's used, it doesn't become kind of common parlance, which a lot of these things are just throwaway insults, which it's not that. And I think we, as whatever generation we are, have to say no and educate people, which I'm supposed to be doing, and into that. It's a much wider thing than the threats.
Pauline?
I haven't read the piece, so but I could only comment generally. I think the first thing is that any public figures who take part in social media that get abuse also need to learn themselves to block people, delete people. I would take no hesitation now. If someone gives me a comment, I know that it's not genuine, or some might be on the borderline, so you have to almost self-regulate. And also, and it's happened to many public figures in the past, if you feel that you're threatened by what's been said, you do need to go to the police. I've actually appeared in court in the past, me and my caseworker over a case, and the fiscal said to me I did the right thing because I could tell that the person who was giving me abuse had done it before, and I was right about that. So there needs to be some self-regulation and probably some cross-party consensus, and I suppose social media that we're at one on this. That being a public figure does not give everyone the right to have.
Are women are subject to it more frequently and more often, more particularly than men?
They get more personal comments.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I mean, I think all of those things are true, but I think there's something about social media that distorts the whole political process, because if you're involved in politics, you will have robust debates with your opponents, but you don't hate them individually. You go and have a drink with them later. You can have that friendly relationship while you're disagreeing on particular political issues. That there's something about social media that if somebody's on the other side of a debate from you, people start to think they're my enemy, and they're doing politics wrong. And as we all need to, I think, do a lot more to say to people, you're doing politics wrong here. This is about debating ideas. It's not about attacking individuals, because that's really bringing the whole tone of debate down on social media.
I've seen some stuff. I mean, I saw some stuff this week, which I won't go into, but some stuff that people whose views I probably agree with, saying things about people, and I absolutely didn't agree with what they were saying, and I guess I felt, should I go into Twitter and say, well, call them out for that, or does that just prolong the whole discussion and then maybe encourage them to say more stuff?
I think the evidence suggests that it does prolong it. It just fuels the entire thing. I mean, I take Pauline's point about self-regulation. I suspect we've all, to some degree or another, been involved in, Twitter exchanges, good, bad, indifferent. Some of them very, very, very bad.
Some are very good though.
Yeah, of course. I'm reluctant to block anyone simply because I feel as though it's almost an admission of defeat in a way. I'd rather just ignore them. But it can be very difficult to sit there, look at something coming up, and you want to respond. You want to come back at them, not in a personal way necessarily, but just pointing out some of the inadequacies, shall we say, within their argument. But you know that forum's not suitable for that. It's inevitably going to go spiralling downwards. It's so limiting.
And that's a decision I took, not to get involved, but then I'm thinking, well, how do you stop it? I mean, if you don't go to people and say, I'm sorry, this is unacceptable, if you don't do that, how are those people going to change their behaviour?
I mean, there does seem to be certain areas as well, doesn't there, that are, irrespective of gender here, there's certain political issues. There are certain, I mean, immigration being one of them. You know, sectarianism in football. I mean, after last
Football,
weekend,
yeah.
I mean, you know, social media was awash with the most horrendous things going on there. So there are certain kind of pressure points and buttons that seem to generate and bring out the very worst in people in that way. And it's hard to see how you can have any constructive discussion, or indeed whether those people, frankly, Richard, would even listen to you if you pointed that out to them. So you know you're limited. That's why I think these initiatives are, you know, hopefully take this forward.
It's definitely support for my initiative, which is close the internet down. Because I honestly don't see one good thing that the internet has brought us.
I do suspect that's partly motivated by the fact that you're a newspaper man as well.
Not at all. Not in the slightest. Not in the slightest.
What is the internet?
Some new
Something for young people.
not for the likes of us. Johnny Depp.
Yeah, Johnny Depp. Again, it goes back a little bit, I think, to what's been said in social media and people defending what he's alleged to have done, saying Johnny's a great film star. He couldn't possibly have done what is being said that he's done.
No, we don't know whether he did it. We don't know whether he didn't do
don't.
it. So clearly, it's difficult to comment. But I guess it's true that abuse can affect any strata of society. Whether it did so here or not, we don't know. But there is an assumption that, oh wait a minute, that doesn't happen in those circles. And is that an interesting is the wrong word? Is that a valuable thing to open discussion on?
I think the kind of combination of these being two very famous people and a discussion of domestic violence is really quite toxic. It's really quite toxic. I mean, they are just human beings and they will be affected by the same kind of issues that affect everybody. So, you know, I mean, I think like most women in my age, I adore Johnny Depp and I would be really upset if this was true, really upset. I don't know if it's true or not. If it is true, then there's no excuse at all and he should pay the price for it. And I'm going to wait and see what the findings are. But, you know, it's almost like the kind of celebrity culture. You've got to take a side and then you can say anything you like, you know,
Is this trial by media?
Well, I think when you put yourself out into a situation like they do, there's the argument that you're setting up your personal life because they've used it. But I do think there's another issue here, and the abuse is absolutely appalling. If it happened there, abuse is appalling, and it does happen everywhere. But I think his mental health, it's fairly obvious his mental health has been failing for a wee while. He did the crazy stuff before, but now I don't think it's an act anymore. If you saw him on Graham Norton the last time, and if you saw that ridiculous thing he did in Australia, which I think he thought was funny, but it was actually quite tragic.
Was that the dog
The
thing?
apology. Alleged apology. But domestic abuse isn't acceptable. Male, female, doesn't matter. It's just not acceptable. It's just really difficult to know what the truth is here when they're talking about immediately they're suing. But I mean, his mother's just died. There's a huge amount of stuff goes on. But the reaction to it is not violence. And I think that violence is coming into society much more. It's again kind of common parlance. That's the reaction to have an explosion, your road rage, your throwing your phone, whatever. It's just not acceptable.
No.
But before. We would have something like this would happen, it would be in the papers, and people would talk about it in the pubs and over the garden wall or whatever. Now they go into Twitter and it's all over the place. And, I mean, I guess there's no stopping that now. Pauline?
Well, I would take a much harder line on these things. I think there should be you probably won't agree with this, Richard, but there should be an absolute ban on doing a story about an allegation in a criminal offence. It's unavoidable that it's trial by media, and so I did read a wee bit of that story, because like Mary, I'd be heartbroken if this was true. That was one of the calls that the police attended, and they left the house saying there was no evidence, and that wouldn't have happened in Scotland. In Scotland, an accusation of either party, they would already be detained and charged, and there would be bail conditions by now. So I thought that was interesting, but I would just take a harder line generally. It is in the criminal process. It should remain in the criminal process.
I mean, that's kind of reflected in a lot of the newspaper coverage today. You can, I mean, speaking as a newspaper person, sort of they're kind of grappling with this. They're obviously being careful about the legal positions naturally, but equally trying to kind of pluck out individual aspects of the story, whether it's alleged affairs or a breakdown in terms of mental health or drug abuse or whatever the case may be, and we don't know any of these things for absolute sure.
No, but in terms of the law in America is very different.
Of course.
Well, here, but the internet ain't. The internet's
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's really difficult to grapple with those things. However, moving on to Govan Hill, which is a story in Sunday Times, I believe, a report on Govan Hill, which is a place dear to your heart, I believe, man.
Yes,
And
yes.
mine, I had my first flat in Govan
Did you?
Hill. I did.
Right, I'm not sure. The Govan Hill then is the same as Govan Hill now, according to this. This is a story about an article by Peter Ross.
Yes,
He's an
it's
amazing
actually-
writer.
Yeah, he is. I mean, the only thing that disappoints me about this article is that it's quite short. Because I know he spent quite a long time in Govan Hill, so I was hoping for something a bit longer. But it is a really good article, and it kind of balances the kind of different aspects of the Govan Hill story. I mean, you get a lot of quite sensational coverage in the press about it. So it was nice to see somebody taking the time, speaking to a lot of people in the local area, actually going under the surface of some of the issues. It's a very good piece.
But is it? I mean, is Govan Hill you're obviously familiar
He
with
paints
it's quite a bleak picture,
bleak picture.
of the area. I mean, do you think it reflects how bad it is,
It
or is it worse than that?
It reflects parts of Govan Hill. I mean, it's a fairly big area. It reflects parts of it which are extremely overcrowded, because you have a population of Roma migrants there who live in extreme poverty, who can't get benefits. The kind of myth that people come here to get benefits is just a myth, because those people generally can't access benefits, who have been exploited by bad landlords, who have been exploited by gang masters and so on, and there are enormous challenges in how we deal with this, and it's a process which takes time. There's no quick fix to it. So he's bang on, in terms of the problems which exist there. But there is also a huge amount of positivity in Govan Hill, and there's also a very, very strong community spirit. It's a community which has resisted the kind of racist explanation of what's going on. So there is a lot of hope, but there is also a lot of work that needs to be done.
He makes the point as well, does he not, about the kind of owner occupancy, tenancy sort of issues as well, that a great deal of the housing is actually, rented accommodation, with, shall we say, certain landlords that are, less than scrupulous in certain regards, and this creates this vicious circle there in terms of trapping people in that environment.
Yeah, and what's happening now is a programme where the council has enhanced enforcement powers against landlords, which they're now beginning to use, and there's also a programme to buy up housing in private ownership, often by landlords, and hand that over to the social housing. So that's a programme which will take time, because you can't just make people, if you have a flat which is overcrowded, you can't just make those people homeless.
No.
They need to be rehoused. So it's not something that's going to happen in the space of a year, but it will be something that happens in the space of 5 or 6 or 7 years to improve things.
Claire, you've got a story about charities
Yes.
and the amount of money that goes towards the cause.
Yes,
or
absolutely.
not.
There's a story out. The Charity Commission looked at a random selection of 350 British charities that rely on mail shots for most of their funding, so it's not all charities. But the horrendous figures were that they spend up to 90% of the income on the promotion rather than actually the charities. Mother Teresa, God bless her, the charity, her Mother Teresa's Children's Foundation, raised almost £1 million, and 81% of that went on the promotion, which is actually shocking. I mean, it's a step on from the chuggers, and I'm sure we've all had fairly robust debates in the streets with chuggers who try and shame people into and guilt them out to give. I just think it's a really bad thing for charity. It's for charitable giving, this, because I think as a nation we are fairly charitable. We could debate that in another forum, because it just allows you to give up. You just think, well, why should I give anything? And it's that awful thing that it feeds into. But I think it's horrendous. There's all these very worthwhile causes, children's charities, hungry children, World Children's Fund, all sorts of bread and water foundations. And it reminded me, I think I mentioned earlier, of a book that I read that's not faultless, about doing good better. William McCaskill had it out last year, about looking at non-glamorous charities and looking at how they're funded, where the money actually goes, and how much of it goes to the thing that you think it's going to. And one of the most useful was to provide malaria nets. So not sexy, there's no big names involved in it, which I understand a lot of them need. And it'll be interesting to discuss some of the other charities, because they're not, I have to say, it's horrendous, but it's not all charities, it's the ones that rely on.
I mean, I've done a lot of collaborative work with journalists, with humanitarian organisations, charities and whatever. And one of the things that does trouble me about it is that it's become a competitive industry.
Absolutely.
It's an industry like any other. It's very commercial now. Branding is so much more important quite often, and it's a dog-eat-dog environment, and I suspect that's where the shift in emphasis towards the kind of administration, the branding, the promotional aspect has become the mainstream there, and that's a huge issue that needs to be addressed, rather than actually a degree of transparency in saying, well, what percentage of your pound is actually going, as you say, to the malaria net or to this or that or whatever. And I think some of the better sort of charities and NGOs recognise that, and are keen to make those changes, but it's very difficult in such a competitive
Absolutely, I mean, I understand it's difficult to get to people, absolutely, but this is it's tilted completely the wrong way.
There was a really interesting conversation on Sky News this morning about this, and one of the panellists in the newspaper review, they were saying that on beside every charity's logo, there should be a little pound coin with a percentage in it of how much they spend on their admin and how much of it goes to the charity. I mean, we all understand you have to spend money to organise it and to do it, but surely there should be some kind of limit on what that should be.
We've had the controversy recently about some of the enormous salaries that heads of charities and NGOs and whatever are being paid. That's another area that I think creates a degree of disillusionment amongst the giver, the donor, the person who puts their hand in their pocket, or drops their pound into the tin. I think they really have to have a close look at how they're running their operation, in every respect.
One interesting aspect, I didn't see any green charities involved. I don't know whether that's because they don't do that, because they want to ruin that. I haven't looked closely enough and looked at all the research. But.
Time for one last quick story before we move on. The battle for Bond. Can we ever have a female or a black Bond?
I'm going to say
I'm setting you up for this one here.
no. I would really love to say yes. I really would. I really want to say yes, but I'm going to say I don't see how it makes sense.
Bond makes sense. Shock horror.
Well, it kind of has its own internal logic, doesn't it? I mean, like, it would mean that the whole universe of Bond up until now would have to be not true, wouldn't it? Sorry.
Shock horror.
I don't know.
Maybe when you wake up in a shower and it's all been a dream.
I don't know. Would it help? Would you like to see a woman Bond?
I'm not sure about a woman Bond. I think Gillian Anderson would be a brilliant
I think she'd be great.
baddie, actually.
Yeah.
I think if she's not Bond, she would be a fabulous baddie. I have to say, I would very much like to see Idris Elba as Bond. I have my reasons for that.
What would those reasons be? What would those reasons be? Would it have anything to do with swimming trunks?
I think Judi Dench was pushed out because she would have been a better Bond than many of them. She was too late, killed off.
Too late, yeah.
I do wonder what Ian Fleming would have thought of it. I mean, if he was still around and being asked about how the Bond sort of
whatever he thought of it probably
lineage
wouldn't
would
have been
actually
printable. I would suspect.
So if we can't have Idris Elba and we can't have Gillian Anderson, who would be your top choice for a Bond?
All right, presuming that it's a male.
No.
Oh, goodness.
They're suggesting Tom Hiddleston,
I would
Damian Lewis.
I would start a campaign. Anybody but Tom.
Well, really, I thought he was superb in The Night Manager.
We
I
all
have to
said
say.
that this morning.
He was
but
quite a believable hero.
I don't think he's a Bond.
You don't
a
think
believable
he's a Bond?
nasty figure as well, which
Yeah.
actually,
Bond
Bond
is,
certainly in the
yeah.
original books. I mean, it's quite dark. I mean, it's quite, and I think that would be a great reflection. I don't want some cuddly Bond, do you? I mean, you don't want that stuff.
I just don't. I don't personally like his smile. So I put that out there.
And on that note, it's the end of the newspaper review. Claire, thanks very much for joining us. It was really good to chat to you today. We're going to have some music now,
absolutely.
aren't we?
Yes, we are. With Emma Durkin, who is going to play a set of reels
on her fiddle.
On her fiddle, yes.
Do you fiddle?
I don't play that. I think if you mean I don't play the fiddle, I do not play the fiddle. I did once at one point play the cello.
Okay.
Did you really?
I did. I did play the cello.
Were you any good?
No. I wasn't any good. I went to school in Kilwinning and lived in Troon, and it involved taking the cello on the train, which took its toll on the instrument, and my pal at one stage tried to play the guitar with the cello. It fell to pieces, and there ended my career on the cello. But Emma's career on the fiddle is just starting.
just wanted to get up and
You should have just done that. You should just
shouldn't I?
have
I
got
just
up
wanted
and
Richard will be taking up the cello again.
that's never going to happen. The cello is in pieces. So, Pauline McNeill is still with us after the paper review. Pauline, you're just back from the Lebanon, where you were out with Caring Scotland, I believe.
Yes.
Now, what was the purpose of the trip?
Well, I'd been working with a group of people in Scotland, mainly from the Muslim community, but others from different organisations. And we started taking aid to Calais in France, just because we wanted to do something. And so we made 2 trips there, quite successfully. So we were basically collecting warm clothing, things like that. So we decided we wanted to continue the work. And so we're calling ourselves Caring Scotland. Now this will happen before I got elected. So we had decided that we wanted to do some international trips, starting with Lebanon and followed by probably Iraq or Turkey. So I'd already paid for my airline tickets, so I decided that I would ask the whip if I could get a week off to go, which they kindly
They're
gave
not going
me.
to say no to that.
Well, I was relieved because I really wanted to do it. I'd been working with them and I thought what they're doing is great, because I suppose in contrast to the story that you were talking about earlier about charities, we could safely say that all the money that we raised was used. We funded the trip ourselves, and so we were able to provide food parcels for many refugees, Syrian refugees mainly, in Lebanon.
So where did you visit when you were there?
Well, we travelled all over Lebanon, and so we first of all went to the north, and basically we found families. To let you understand, there are refugee camps. Some places are not that safe to go, although we did go quite close to the Syrian border. And so we went to individual houses, and also so we spoke to the families. And the parcels that we were able to provide would be food supply for about a month. And in some places we got them into sort of community halls, and we sat down and spoke to them about their needs. And so then also we travelled we did quite a lot in Beirut itself, because a lot of families are dispersed around there, including some of the Palestinian refugee camps, which are quite well known, Bruj al Barajni, which I'm sure you know well, David, and also Shatila camp, so in Bruj, the camp has increased in numbers from 20,000 to 46,000 as a result of the Syrian influx. So we managed to cover quite a bit of the country.
You must have heard some really harrowing stories from the families when you were there.
Well, the one that sticks in my mind is that as an audience of mainly women and children, and a woman, middle-aged woman, where she was crying. And so one of our party went over to comfort her, and later on I asked one of the Arabic speakers to get her to explain why she was crying, and she said that she'd been praying every day at the mosque for someone to come and rescue them or bring them some help, and she cried when we came in because she felt her prayers had been answered. So yeah, I mean, the stories are pretty tear-jerking, to be honest. Everything from, because they still pay rent even where they are. I mean, it's $300 a month they're having to find, and so the older children have to go out to work if they can, and very often they're just short of their rent. So they are starving quite a lot.
I think I'm sure you agree with it. It puts in perspective. You know, you hear all the bleating that goes on here about taking in refugees and the numbers and whatever. I mean, to get that in proportion to a country like Lebanon, which is not that large, and already, as you say, it has a refugee population going back to the days of 1948, the Palestinians or whatever. This tiny country, is just got an enormous influx of refugees, and it's already a politically very fragile place. But it's managed to cope with that remarkably. It really is unbelievable.
How has it done that?
Well, I think in part it's to do with the Lebanese themselves know all about war, and they've lived with it, the civil war in Lebanon, and they understand these kind of problems. But it's not all roses. I mean, as Pauline says, I mean, there's still exploitative individuals there. I mean, making money out of these refugees and charging exorbitant rates for sleeping in some outhouse or whatever the case may be. I mean, I came across that time and again when I was there. But by and large, being able to cope with the numbers that they have is a remarkable testament to just how solid Lebanon is.
It was put to me that the published figures are a quarter of the Lebanese population are refugees. It was put to me that it is nearer a third, and I would not at all be surprised at that. But I think the politics over it is that the country is near breaking point. There's no doubt about it. And so we had some political discussions while we were there, and you'll be aware of this, David, that I think they're talking about the history of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, where Lebanon was created out of that, as to whether or not there might actually be a redrawing of that's the real fear. Because if Lebanon doesn't survive as a nation, as a very, very proud, patriotic and strong nation, and very much,
and it's inextricably tied up in the war in Syria next door. I mean, Hezbollah's involved there.
This is it. The young Lebanese are signing up by the day to fight ISIS. I mean, it's the Lebanese and Hezbollah that are fighting. This is not really commonly understood. I mean, Hezbollah is a word that is mentioned that people get into hysterics thinking about. I mean, there are obviously issues about Hezbollah and the nature of it, but it is widely supported by the Lebanese population as being the resistance of its small nation. And if it weren't for they want to sign up and fight because they recognise that the region is just absolutely explosive. And historically, there's been a lot of so Syria and Lebanon, you could freedom of movement. Really, there had been up to the war broke out. So I think it's extremely volatile actually.
Have you been to these particular camps, David? I know you've been to camps elsewhere.
Well, I mean, I think I've been to some of the camps in Lebanon, but I mean, as Pauline says, I mean, one of the things is that it's the way in which, and I think to some extent Lebanon's almost unique within the region, that it's absorbed the refugees in a different way. One of the reasons they don't want to create large camps for Syrian refugees in Lebanon is because the Lebanese remember all too well the creation of large camps like Sabra and Shatia, like Burj al Baraj, all these places where Palestinians were housed, which became hotbeds of Palestinian militancy during the civil war in Lebanon. So the Lebanese have got this, I mean, indeed many NGOs or humanitarian organisations you talk to will say they want, it would be easier to process the numbers of refugees if they had proper facilities and proper camps. But the Lebanese authorities have got this memory of the problems it created on their doorstep with the Palestinians. So they're not keen to do that. Hence they've been absorbed into the wider population, into homes and private accommodation.
What I thought was interesting though, when we went to Shatila one night, so we gave advance warning we were coming, so it was mainly Palestinian group, it was a youth group, and I thought the difference between that in the camp and where we'd seen the Syrian refugees is although they were poor and they're still very much fighting their own struggle, is they were quite, they were a lot happier and they had formulated ways of living in their life.
There's an infrastructure there, But that's again what the Lebanese are afraid of, that these places become enclaves and entities in which there's a political militancy that could threaten the stability of Lebanon itself. So they don't want a repeat of that. But
even their conditions are quite shocking too, in terms of their access to medical treatment. And one of the things that you've probably seen this too, is so they do have internet and they do have electricity, but the water pipes run along the same lines. In fact, some of the electrical wires are actually wrapped round the water pipes, and everyone knows where their own when their own electricity is plugged into the fuse box, and it's so dangerous. So there have been something like 46 people being electrocuted just by living there.
When you hear stories of that, or when you read about the camps, I've never been, I don't presume you have been. Do you ever feel just despair at it, like it's just too big a problem for politics to solve?
I think what makes me despair is the fact that we just go through these cycles and nothing ever seems to get learned. I think that's what makes me despair more than anything else, is just when are we actually going to learn not to repeat the same mistakes we made the past 2 or 3 times.
When you see it, when you're there, I mean, how do you think? Right, Caring Scotland sounds a great thing, but it's a drop in the ocean.
Aye, absolutely.
But still worth doing.
It's definitely worth doing because apart from providing something for families, they need to know that the outside world is not giving up on them. That's what's more important than providing the aid, is that you will go to these efforts to show them that you care about what's happening to them. But no, you can't provide answers. I mean, many of the families came to talk to me about how they could come to Scotland. I didn't have any positive news to give them. Their houses have been destroyed in Syria. They can't go back there. It just seems, it is a sense of despair of what's going to happen next.
I think if there's a sense, if you feel a sense of despair, where I feel a sense of despair is on the kind of global response level, in a way. I mean, we had the World Humanitarian Summit in Istanbul earlier this week, and I wrote a piece for the paper on this, and if you think about it, I mean, it was just laden with hypocrisy from top to bottom. Number one, it's being held in Turkey, which is not exactly got the best human rights record. It's destroying whole swathes of southeastern Turkey and the Kurdish population. It's stopping Syrian refugees coming over the border. So they choose to hold it in Istanbul, right? And for a start, it's hosted by the United Nations, who themselves need to get their house in order. I mean, they've been under accusations from everything from child sex abuse in the Central African Republic to, trading in golden guns in Congo. So they're clearly hypocrites to some extent as well. And that's before you even look at the people around the table, many of them representing countries. As in today's Observer, Britain sells record 3 billion of weapons in a year to regimes that violate human rights, So that's where I despair. On the one hand, running with the hare and hunting with the hounds. On the one hand, here we are talking about human rights and humanitarian responses. They're quite happy to sell 3 billion quid's worth to Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Burundi, wherever. That's where the problem is. I mean, the well-meaning altruism and of the humanitarian sector is one thing, but the politicians behind a lot of this really need to be questioned.
I think David's on the money there. Why can we not resolve the aspect of what our country's doing in providing arms? In the south of Lebanon, we went to witness I have witnessed it before in 2006, as you have, the destruction of the war with Israel, but they dropped 1 million cluster bombs.
Yeah.
And they've only recovered 25%. And according to the Lebanese, the Americans sold the Israelis 1 million, in fact more than that, cluster bombs that go as far back as when they used it in the Vietnam War.
And it comes right to our doorstep here. I mean, many of these weapons that are being used by the Saudis to bomb Yemen, creating one of the world's major humanitarian crises right now, are made on our doorstep here by American companies in Scotland. There's a company in Fife that deals with this. There's questions being raised in the Commons. I know they're due to be raised. They've been raised already. They've made, there's been articles written about this in the press. Where is the accountability for this? You can't, on the one hand, say you're helping on a humanitarian level when you're flogging this stuff, or giving permission to do so, and profiting. And this is on the legal end, £3 billion worth. What about the illegal arms trade that goes under the table as well? So that's where, I despair to some extent unless we address that problem head on.
That is, as you say, legal. You're saying that we should just say, right, we're not selling arms.
Well, the point is
or
that...
we're not selling arms to certain regimes.
Well, the point is that these countries that are listed here that we've sold this to are on the Foreign Office's watch list of dodgy regimes. They are countries with dodgy leaders, dodgy human rights backgrounds.
Is number one.
Absolutely. At the very least, it may be difficult to stop the arms trade, nigh on impossible, because it's a huge part of the economy, I admit that. But who are your clients? Who are your customers here? And here on the one hand, we have a government that's selling these weapons to create a crisis that forces people to leave their homes, and then they throw their hands up and say, well, we're pulling the drawbridge up, you can't come in here. The hypocrisy of that is profound.
Interestingly, if you talk to senior Lebanese politicians or anyone with a view on it, they think that the West could actually control Daesh tomorrow.
Absolutely.
They think that the fact that we are continuing to supply arms to Saudi Arabia in particular, which is probably now widely known as being a major funder of ISIS, I would argue with them that that's not the case, but that's what they think, is that the West could stem the flow, finance the ISIS tomorrow, but they're not doing it. And that deeply worried me that is the view in that region.
They've got no reason, absolutely no reason to trust us. None at all.
Scotland's, I think, taken a third of all refugees from Syria that have come to the UK. Scotland's taken a third of them. It seems to me that this is probably one thing that kind of unites the political parties in Scotland, that we should be doing as much as we possibly can. Could we be doing more, and how could we be doing more?
Well, I think it's partly as David said. I think that there needs to be more accountability for what we're doing in the political side of things, in terms of, it is probably the most complex conflict in the world ever now. But it has to be a political solution. In the short term, then I do think that's why Britain overall should increase its numbers, because I think we have, it's a question of a responsibility I think we have to them. And I would draw that distinction. It doesn't mean to say we're taking all the refugees anywhere in the world. It's drawing a distinction between those who are most exposed and affected by decisions that we have taken. So I do think there's going to have to be, I'd like to see more dialogue actually, at a general level, even in the Scottish Parliament, about the impact of what we do around the world.
There's a piece, I'm not sure which paper it's in, I think it might be the Sunday Times. It's a senior UN official in Geneva, a Danish guy, I think Michael Moder or something his name. But he is saying that, face up to this. This is not going to stop the numbers that are coming here. He's talking about not just refugees from Syria, but the whole, because there's still this issue about refugees, migrants, how do you distinguish between them? But as we're seeing coming through from Libya and North Africa, there are swathes of people from sub-Saharan Africa that will be heading this way as well. We don't have any kind of structures seriously in place to cope with that at the moment, All we are doing, mind you, is sending warships down to Libya to make sure that there's no arms smuggling or whatever, we helped bomb Libya, if you remember. Now we're having to send the SAS and the SBS down there to try and stem, the vacuum that was created and filled by IS. We get ourselves embroiled in these escapades and adventures without ever addressing the humanitarian consequences or thinking about the aftermath of any kind of intervention.
Just before we finish, when I was reading up about you before today, I discovered that you have a special interest in the rights of girls in the developing world, working with them to help public speaking and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a bit more about that. Why did you get so involved in that aspect?
Well, to be honest, it was something I picked up on social media, just about just the level of underdevelopment across the that there isn't about the rights of girls. Probably it was maybe the story around Malala, you know, the Pakistani girl who's shot in the head by the Taliban, and she's led this campaign. And that truly really got my attention.
She's coming to Scotland, isn't she, soon? Yeah, she's here in August, I think.
Is she? I don't know that well. I just think she's been such a brave girl, and I think she has actually done a lot of good. And then when you dig deeper into it, forced marriages, you just realise how much work has to be done out there in terms of the rights of young girls. And so it's an interest that I haven't been able to develop the way I would have liked to, but it's something I hope to undertake in the coming years. And I thought that's one of the things, one of the companies that I'd set up, which is a social enterprise, one of the things that we could maybe do, because some of my work around the world, and some of Tunisia, for example, we've been talking about going over there and talking about building confidence amongst women. So that's where it came from. And yeah, some brilliant organisations out there, I have to say, doing fantastic work. And so hopefully we'll start to see some progress in the not too distant future.
Pauline, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, Dave, I think as well you were wanting to talk, there's some developments in Fallujah.
Well, I mean, you know, it kind of relates to what we were talking about a moment ago, and I mean, you know, there's this huge battle developing at the moment where they're trying to push IS out of Fallujah. As you know, Fallujah historically in Iraq is a city that's always been a hotbed. I mean, it previously was held by Al-Qaeda in Iraq. The Americans, for them, in 2014, it was the costliest battle of the Iraq war. And now the Iraqis are taking the fight to try and push IS out of Fallujah at the moment. It has to be said the Americans are not too keen in this, because they would much prefer the regime in Baghdad to concentrate on Mosul, the second largest city, and that battle's yet to come. But I mean, as we sit here right now, I mean, this battle for Fallujah is raging. And again, going back to this humanitarian aspect here, it's ordinary people that have been caught in the crossfire, trying to get out and unable to do so. And the United Nations is warning about, you know, another dire humanitarian situation between Fallujah and Mosul in the months ahead. Rather despairing, as you say, in terms of that situation.
However, we'll soon find out in the Chilcot report. I mean, I see Tony Blair recently took.
Oh, you mean the Chilcot report's not out yet?
No, that's weird, isn't it? I'm sure. I think you missed it.
I know.
As far as I can tell, we'll find out what we all
already
already know.
Yes.
Although Tony Blair, though, has kind of admitted that there is some link between the decisions he took and the growth of ISIS, and the decisions he took, which he now says he regards with some humility. I don't quite know what that means, but we'll find out with his more
wasn't
reason.
An apology.
It wasn't the word sorry. Was not.
No.
However, yeah, we shall see. We shall see. That'll be it. So we say goodbye to Pauline now, and we are just about to look at to have some comedy.
Yes, Ross McClellan.
Ross,
welcome.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to take you on a slightly off-kilter view of this week in politics. Let's start over in America. Donald Trump was nailed on as the preferred GOP candidate this week. Donald recently announced that he'll be gracing the shores of Scotland again shortly. I can only hope that Mr. Trump's luggage is somehow lost in transit, if only so someone has the pleasure of asking the question, Donald, where's your trousers? Belter. On the other side of American politics, Bernie Sanders entered a rally this week to the soundtrack of DMX's Where the Hood At. Now, that is a very astute political move, using a song entitled Where the Hood At, because it ingratiates not only the African American community, but also the Ku Klux Klan and people who enjoy keeping their hair dry in the rain. Yeah. Another belter. Right, so moving back to these shores. The ghost of Tony Blair is still haunting the Labour Party. Ooh, I don't imagine Jeremy Corbyn will be doing any good sleeping anytime soon, judging by the sound of chains rattling owing to Tony Blair's famous over-gesticulation. Now, Tony Blair said that Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister would be a disastrous experiment. Now, I feel that is slightly rich, coming from a man whose most famous experiment resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people on the basis of an illegal war. Yeah, that's right, Tony. I know what you've been up to, you cheeky monkey. Right, so... the Euro debate, that's hotting up. Are we in? Are we out? Are we just shaking it all about? Who knows, right? An interesting character waded in to show his support of the Brexit campaign this week. Yeah, famous Canadian singer, royalist, and double Golden Queen's Jubilee medal recipient Bryan Adams said this week, without a hint of irony, do the Brits really want to be governed by bureaucrats? Okay, not getting your statement there, Brian, but, think about what you say before you say it. But people might be asking, what does Bryan Adams really know about Eurozone politics? Does he know anything? Well, I have it under good authority that Brian actually took a class in it back in the summer of '69. Oh, yeah. Back in the summer of '69. Okay, there we go. I like to think that being in Europe with Britain is a lot like being in a relationship. There's problems sometimes, but you have to just deal with it. Like adults, I had some problems in my own relationship last week. I'll tell you, it's slightly off topic, but I'll tell you what happened anyway. Basically, I went for a night out with some comedian friends. Now, one of those comedians happens to be a lady who took a picture with me, a fun picture, nothing weird, sinister, took a picture with her hand pressed slightly on my chest. I don't know if anyone feels that is an inappropriate picture. No, it's not, I've checked, right, but my girlfriend did not agree, I will tell you that right now. Day one, what happened was a 3-day argument, less an argument, more her arguing at me and me going, it's just a picture, right? So, day one, there was a slight mention of it where she said, I seen that picture you were tagged in Facebook. And I thought, well, this is not the last I will hear about this picture. It has been noted. Day two, after me telling her, it's just a picture, just relax about it, just it's nothing weird, it's just friends. Day two started with, I've been thinking a lot about that picture. I'm like, oh, here we go, it's all going off now. There was a lengthy debate that day about said picture. Day three changed everything. Day three was a day of rage, which started with, you know what, I don't like that picture. If you don't get that picture offline, people are going to look at, my friends are going to look at me and start to think that I'm an idiot. Do you realise how hard it is as a comedian to not jump into that conversation and just go, start thinking you're an idiot, ? It's really hard. I'm chasing laughs all the time. I don't mean it, but you want to laugh. But, and then that was it. And then essentially what followed that was an argument. And I'm not backing down in this argument. This is my own Tiananmen Square moment. I'm not backing down. I realised that it's not really about the picture. She's just pushing her insecurities onto me because she's insecure about her body. I think her body's beautiful. She's insecure about her skin. I think her skin is as smooth as silk, right? She's insecure about the way she dresses. And, well, I can agree with that, They say dress for the job that you want, and she is clearly wanting the job as a terrible dresser, right? But aside from that, and that was it. She tried to do the old fake breakup with me. We've all been there, we've all experienced this. She was like, oh, is that it? Is that 8 years for a photo that you just... What? And I'm like, there's nothing wrong with this. I think it speaks volumes for my character that I would rather lose an 8-year relationship than a small argument, So So, and that was it. I thought, well, maybe this is it. It depends how she reacts later on. We didn't speak to each other for the rest of the day. 12 hours of pure silence. And then on day 4, things changed slightly. Oh, yes, they did. Because on day 4, start of the day, I got a message that said, I think I owe you an apology. And I'm like, well, finally. She's realised that there's nothing wrong. It's just a picture of a girl with her hand on my chest. There's nothing weird about it. But then the next message read, I've realised that that is in fact your own hand. It was my own hand in my chest. It was my own hand on my chest. How did I not realise it? Now I'm insecure. Do I have lady hands? I mean, So I guess the point I'm trying to make about that is nobody really cares what you think, Brian Adams. Stop talking, ladies and gentlemen. That is pretty much me in my view of politics this week. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers.
Thank you, Ross. Can I just say to Ross's girlfriend, the fact that we said nothing does not mean that we support him in his argument with
Taking
you.
no sides.
We are, exactly. We are neutral. We are neutral.
Switzerland.
We are Switzerland in that debate. Now I'd like now to welcome to the show Mark McNichol. Mark has been involved in the Justice for Willie McCrae campaign. Very many people might know not a thing about the Willie McCrae campaign. So Mark, perhaps you could tell us about the campaign and how you first became involved with it.
So, so my first involvement, I'd never heard the name Willie McCrae to start with. So my first involvement was when I was approached by an actor-producer by the name of Adam Robertson, who asked if I'd be interested in producing a stage play written by a Thurso playwright called George Gunn. And the play was fictional, a fictional account of the kind of Willie McCrae story. So I'd never heard of the play up until that point. So I read the play, thought the play was amazing. I'm a fan of Adam, a fan of George. I agreed to produce the play. It was a fantastic success at the Edinburgh Fringe 2 years ago. We pretty much sold out like 27 shows. We had to put on more shows to cope with demand. Directed by Libby MacArthur and an amazing team, Helen Mackay, Jimmy Chisholm, too many names to mention. So the show was a massive success in Fringe terms, but it also gave a lot of people like me an introduction to the name Willie McCrae. And when I started to kind of do my own digging on the Willie McCrae story, I was like, can this be true?
Who was he?
So he was a Glasgow lawyer, or he was from the Highlands originally, but he was working in Glasgow. He would be considered by many to be a thorn in the side of the Westminster establishment. He was an independence campaigner. He was SNP politician and senior party member. He had an amazing career in law and politics, and he was based in Glasgow. And the story that I heard was that an eyewitness had him being followed from West Nile Street in Glasgow on the Friday afternoon by Special Branch, and then turning up the next morning shot in the head, and the official verdict was suicide. So obviously that in itself kind of is a bit suspicious. So I started to investigate it more, and like many people, I was concerned by the circumstances. Well, the weeks leading up to his death, in terms of break-ins at his office, break-ins at his home, heavy surveillance, and then on the Friday, if this was the case, then potentially the last people to see him alive were Special Branch. And then he turns up on the Saturday morning in a ditch, his car's come off the road, he's been shot in the head. There's a lot of questions about the distance of the gun from the car. Could he have shot himself in the head and then thrown the gun 200 yards away? And then there was questions relating to what happened when he got to Inverness and then Aberdeen Hospital. Died the following day. More questions about the car being taken away from the scene on the Saturday and then brought back on the Sunday.
How long ago was this?
1985.
Yeah.
So, we've had 30 years of kind of this. It's like snowballed, it snowballed, and I was in a situation where I couldn't really separate fact from fiction, because you've got 30 years of Chinese whispers and journalists taking stories and nitbits from various different places, and I kind of didn't know what to believe. So I decided that I just got a sense that at the end of the Fringe, yes, the show was a great experience and it was massively successful, but after that stage production, I felt that if I just moved on to the next project, that would have been it for another 30 years. That way. I mean, I'm nothing special. I'm no big shakes, but sometimes I think in life you just get a sense that this is my job. Because no one else is going to do it.
So how many people are involved in the campaign with you? I mean, it's grown arms and legs as it's gone along.
So after the stage production, I was rejected by the Scottish Parliament petitions office because I wanted to lodge a petition to have a public inquiry. So the Parliament reaction was that the public inquiry is not the appropriate vehicle for the investigation into the death of an individual. That's a fatal accident inquiry. So I set up an online petition, collected, I think, in the region of 13,000 signatures, handed those signatures to the Crown Office, asking for a fatal accident inquiry, and the Crown Office said no. So at that point, again, this sense of, do we walk away or do we keep going with it? And I didn't want to walk away. And in terms of how many, there was 13,000 of us, basically didn't want to walk away. And a kind of, a small group emerged from the 13,000 petition signers who stepped up with, in terms of their time. So we had maybe a kind of small steering committee of maybe 10 or 15 people. I had a background in crowdfunding stage productions, so the Willie McCrae inspired play would not have gone to the Fringe had it not been for the crowdfunding that we did, such as the landscape within the arts when it comes to funding. Obviously it's very difficult to get money to make things happen. So I think round about that time, the people were taking on Alistair Carmichael, and I was very inspired by what they were doing, and I thought, wow, there's an example of citizens challenging the establishment using something that previously I can only associated with creative projects. So I thought the idea of putting together crowdfunding and
this was a crowdfunding bid to try and strip Alistair Carmichael of his parliamentary seat, really, on the grounds that he had lied over the supposed memo, which Frenchgate, indeed.
So the idea of using crowdfunding to challenge the establishment was something I hadn't really thought of prior to that. So a group of us agreed that that's the way we would go. So we set up the which camera is it, that one? www.justiceforwillie.com website. We got a brilliant Scottish designer, James Belkovich, to do as a kind of bespoke logo for the campaign, and we got the support of some manufacturers, and we started putting branded t-shirts and whiskey glasses and decanters and whatnot on the website. Massively, it was great. People were very supportive and started to crowdfund what we were trying to achieve in terms of moving forward after being rejected by the Crown Office for a fatal accident inquiry. And basically what we were saying was we were looking to raise funds to move things forward.
Because
So
opinion is... Sorry.
What did you spend the money on?
So we haven't spent all of it. Basically, we knew that whatever way we were going to go, we would need a war chest. Yeah. We took legal advice because we thought legal would be the way to go, like the people against Alistair Carmichael. But we were advised by our solicitor and a QC, bizarrely, that the only vehicle open to us to challenge the Lord Advocate and the Crown Office over a refusal to hold a fatal accident inquiry is something called a judicial review. And we were told that as a campaign, we could be looking at, it's very difficult to even estimate a figure how much that could cost, but let's pin the tail on the donkey around about the 50k mark, and also if we lost, then that would double, because we would pay their side as well. But if we won, the QC and the solicitor said to us, even in the event of a successful decision from a court, the Crown Office could not be forced to hold a fatalised inquiry, which meant, as far as we were concerned, because obviously
there's no point, surely.
Exactly. So more, a lot more discussions, and then we got to, well, we're going to have our own inquiry. And
I'm wondering where, because a lot of people who do know the Willie McCrae story, think it's fair to say opinion is divided in it. I mean, in terms of the SNP, Mike, where does he sit within SNP world currently?
Yeah, I think opinion is divided in the SNP. I mean, from my own point of view, I don't think there's any doubt that he was a person of interest to the security services because of some of the work he was doing with some of the issues around nuclear waste and so on. But that doesn't necessarily mean that his death was connected to that. I mean, I don't believe he was murdered. That doesn't mean I know that he wasn't. But I don't actively believe that. I'm not sure what happened. I didn't know him myself because it was kind of before my time, but people who did know him have said that they think it is plausible that he took his own life because of various personal issues in his life. And possibly they feel if he was under surveillance, that might just have added to those pressures. So, I don't know what happened. I think that's probably the position of most people in the SNP, although there will be some who strongly believe he was murdered, some who strongly believe he took his own life. I think it's useful if we get a proper investigation.
Well, we're not basically we're not getting one. That's where we as a campaign came in, because it was obvious that as far as the Crown Office was concerned, I mean, they actually told the media, I think it was 2 or 3 days before our petition was handed in, that there wasn't going to be a fatal accident inquiry. So we were still collecting signatures while they were telling the media we weren't getting one. So we decided we were going to take on a private investigator, and we were going to start the process of having our own inquiry to try and separate fact from fiction. So we were very lucky in that we got a couple of retired detectives with maybe 50, 60 years combined experience between them. One of them, when he retired, he was a detective chief inspector, and they've both been involved in a lot of serious investigations during their careers. And we basically, as a campaign, said to them, okay, we want you just to treat this like you would have when you were in the job, and report back to us with your findings, just like we were the Crown Office or the Procurator Fiscal or your superiors. So they, now from my point of view, from the outset, I've never stated an opinion on whether it was suicide or homicide, because I don't see how anyone can. I mean, you said yourself there, you don't think it was murder, but you don't know why. It's just a hunch type thing. So from my point of view, I can't say suicide or homicide until I see some kind of facts or evidence, and we've got 30 years worth of speculation and theories, and we don't really know what the facts are. So what I think, or what I hope is going to happen after our investigation has been concluded. Now, incidentally, these detectives identified 25 witnesses who were of interest to them, some of whom had never been spoken to by journalists or by police. And we've been getting regular updates from the detectives, like our kind of steering committee.
When do you expect them to complete their investigation?
I don't have a date, and we're not hassling them. We're just letting them go on with it. But they're making fantastic progress, because at the last meeting, they told us that of the 25 witnesses, they had spoken to 15. So they've been making great progress. But from me, on a scale of 1 to 10, if 1 is suicide and 10 is homicide, then my worst case scenario is it rocks up around about 5. I think it may be unrealistic for us to expect to get a 1 or a 10. But interestingly, the DCI, he said he was the first person to say this to me. He said, "Listen, it's not a fatal accident inquiry that you actually want. If we uncover any evidence that supports the murder theory, then it's a murder inquiry that we're asking for. It's not a fatal accident inquiry." So at the end of the investigation, then what I think is going to happen is, if it's between number 1 and number 4, that means that we have been unable to undermine the official suicide verdict, and on that basis, everything that we've done and everything that the investigators have brought together, my hope is it will be made available to the public via the justiceforwillie.com website. If we rock up anywhere between number 6 and number 10, then 13,000 of us are coming after the Crown Office asking for a murder inquiry. And in view of the public interest combined with the media love affair with the Willie McCrae story over the last 30 years, I would suggest that it's going to be very difficult for the Crown Office to say no.
When you got involved with this, were you prepared for it to play the part in your life that it clearly now does?
No.
And what was it that just
because I think it's
did that?
I thought, well, you know, I mean, I don't want to live in a society where the security services are murdering citizens. Now, as I said, I'm not saying that's what's happened, but what I'm saying is if they were following him from West Nile Street on the Friday afternoon and he was found the following day, then there are serious questions need to be answered. Also, I mean, we've got a lot of really high-profile supporters attached to the campaign, and one of them is John Finucane. You know, so anybody who is unsure about whether or not the British state is capable of something like that, if they're looking for a precedent, they just need to put the name Pat Finucane into the internet, because I mean, David Cameron apologised in the House of Commons for the role that the British state played in his murder. You know, so it's not like precedents haven't been set. But from my point of view, I feel that there's a lot of stuff being attached to Willie McCrae, so there's a lot of discourse and there's a lot of baggage, and it's turned into this big monster. It's like a snowball that's been going for 30 years, and a lot of it is anti-establishment, a lot of it is independence, and for me, you know, it doesn't matter what Willie McCrae's politics were, regardless whether he's independence or he's pro-union. If I think it's important that if there's a shred of truth to what happened round about his death, then the public deserve answers.
Does the writer in you want to turn this part of the journey into a play or a film or a...
Well, Ian Rankin beat me to it on the novel set. He wrote a brilliant book called The Impossible Dead, and Ian Rankin's been supportive of the campaign as well.
But I mean, since then, the journey that you've gone on since launching the campaign to the end, when it comes to whatever end it comes to, that would make a cracking story to tell.
Yeah, so, I mean, I've been writing full time for 7 years now, and I started off with novels and stage plays, and my current focus is screen. So I've spent the last couple of years kind of working in TV and film projects. I can't speak for every writer out there, but certainly from my point of view, I have got a backlog of ideas. But what I don't have much of is cash and finance and funding, you know.
And time.
Yeah, but I think it would make obviously an amazing story, which would be helped if we could get a bit closer to the truth, obviously.
Sure.
Well, we've been waiting 30 years, so hopefully we are now closer to it than we have been for some time. So we wait with bated breath to find out what happens. Mark, thanks very much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So we've come to the end.
We have
again.
indeed.
It's flown by.
Past, absolutely.
We hope you've enjoyed it just as much as we have. We're going to finish off today with some music from Emma again. She was playing the fiddle for us earlier, but she's also a fantastic harp player. So she's going to play for us Caledonia, I believe.
I believe that's true, although I think, in the interest of accuracy, I think that might be a class track she's playing.
Ah.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yes!
What
Well,
is?
thank you. Thank you. Yes, my musical background, because all those years playing the cello really were not for nothing.
Well, Emma's going to play us out, so before she does, we'd like to say thank you. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you to all
for
of
our
our guests.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you for staying with us, Mary. Thank you to Mark and David and Claire, to Emma and to Ross. And hopefully you'll join us next week again
Same
for
time, same place.
Same time, same place for next Full Scottish.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Caledonia.
you.